In one of my games, I had a player who did not like writing backstories. This is usually fine, but this was a sandbox campaign, and I intended for the characters' backgrounds to have an effect on the game's storyline. It would influence plot hooks, NPCs the players could contact, and things like that. I explained all of this to the player while emphasizing that the player character's choices would influence how the game went. So I had the player send me a short backstory, which I'd flesh out with their input. We're about halfway through this when the player asks, "What's my character's goal? What am I trying to do?" This question stunned me. If it came from a new player, it explained the game is self-motivated. It's up to you what your character's motivation is, but this person had been in multiple campaigns at this point. I think they'd mostly just been in linear games where backstory and motivation aren't as relevant. I was just at a loss in terms of what to say, since I told them this was a sandbox game multiple times, and explained what I meant by that. The player eventually left the game because it wasn't their thing. I just wish they had done it sooner, since I'd already written out an entire backstory for them. Grumble, grumble, grumble. I definitely empathize with the DM's grumbling here. This reminds me of when I'm writing a piece and I spend hours and hours and hours finding a source, and then I spend more hours either interviewing the source or reading the source, and then realize at the very end that there was nothing of value and I was just wasting my time. Same energy here. You spend hours and hours helping a player with their backstory and creating their character, only to realize that they weren't at all worth it in the end. Well, at least they parted amicably. This happened a while ago. I was initially over everything, but recently have been drawn back to events that led me to leave this group. I had joined a game that was hosted by a friend of a friend. I've had no prior experience with anyone else in the party or the dungeon master other than the wizard, who is a college friend of mine. But before session 0 even started, another friend, who we'll call Hannah, approached me and warned me that she was in the last group with the DM. Hannah told me the DM went power hungry and she beefed with them, ending in the group falling out. I took this advice and kept myself aware, but nevertheless joined out of hope things might be okay. We started playing, and I was a rogue, a part of a mafia with hard rules set against harming children and the innocent, which I was more than happy to abide by. I expressed how I wanted to play a con artist, someone who had several identities and would switch between them at certain places, which the DM was okay with. As time went on, there were some early grievances. The first was when the wizard snuck through my belongings and the DM asked me what I had in my bag. I listed off the items in my backpack. It was, a burglar's kit and some other odds and ends. But the DM didn't think that was worthy of the check the wizard made, so they said that all of my items for my disguises and my symbol of my mafia are in there, which I argued they couldn't be in there because 1, I didn't even have that, so the DM just made evidence for me, and 2, if I did have that, I certainly wouldn't put that stuff in my backpack away from me in an unlocked room. After this, the DM made the reveal that I have a god entity in my head, which I was down for when I found out in-game, but then I found out that this entity can just control my character whenever. Not even a check, just boop, you do this now. I strongly disagree with this, as it was forced on my character and not directed by something I willingly gave. The DM just put a little switch on my character that said, I can control your character now. That was quickly removed. For the sake of brevity, I'll bullet point the other instances that just don't sit right with me. Sent to dispatch a group of bandits bullying a town. I knocked one out to tie up and interrogate to see if there were more. As we're done, I mentioned offing them to tie up loose ends, which some members were against, naturally. The DM then mentioned the hostage was a young girl, so we can't kill her, which we all questioned why this was mentioned just now, when we possibly would have just killed her before even knowing. Multiple instances where I used illusions or charms to distract or interrogate enemies, which the DM nerfed by saying the monster just ignores the illusion, or they're not forced to give you that information. Meanwhile, when another party member casts Animate Dead, they actually use the stats of the monster instead of using the stats of a zombie or skeleton. Anytime I do use my false identities, the DM has me roll for performance, arguing that I'm trying to act like someone I'm not, which I argued that would be deception or a check against my disguise kit, not performance, since I'm not trying to entertain, I'm trying to conceal. I also ask if there's any reason as to why they're actively sussing me out, and the DM responds, they're not, but you still have to make the check. Like, why? They don't know my character. If I tell them a false name, how do they know anything differently? DM narrates how my character rips his mouth permanently, pretending to eat something. I'm a reborn, by the way. But later says I can't harm myself to get out of cuffs because it's not rules as written. Not even 5 minutes later, they allow another player to convince guards they're noble, even though they don't think they are, without a check, because it's rule of cool. DM has me roll a check to break out a grapple. It's a natural 20, but I'm still grappled by a singular guard. They didn't even roll a check. We're planning a revolution backed by an underground group. DM says we have a couple days to plan. I choose to research the sewers and the castle plan. Cleric decides to sow discord among the castle priests. Cleric gets caught, and the next day the castle finds out my plans of researching the castle layout and are now on high alert because they researched all the party. So on day 2, we're all being watched because of one person, but I'm somehow the one blamed because they found my plans? At this point, I just leave. I tell the DM I don't want to play because it doesn't feel like I have actual agency or that our characters are meant to do anything else but listen to the DM write a story with us as first-person spectators. DM lashes out at me by saying that I've impacted the game heavily, implying that they had to add ghosts because I wanted my character to become a ghost after they died, which they never mentioned being a thing before then, or even when I approached them with the idea, but okay. So sorry for the long rant. It's just been on my mind recently for no reason, and I feel pretty valid with my agitated look on this GM. This was posted as an Am I the Asshole, so I guess we'll do it, even though the answer, like many times, is rather obvious, so yeah, drum roll please. Not the asshole! Aspects of this GMing are okay if applied fairly to all players, but that's not what we're seeing here. This GM is applying rules specifically to this player, to our rogue here, and not applying them fairly to other players. From the rogue's point of view, this looks like a targeted attack on a single player, which is the opposite of favoritism, and as we've seen before, I think this is even worse than favoritism. It's not fun for anyone at the table. At least with favoritism, someone's getting an advantage. With this kind of thing, you're just watching the DM beat down on the player for no good reason. Look, if the GM has a problem with the player in this campaign, take it out of game. Talk to the player. This kind of thing does nothing to help someone recognize what's wrong, if there even is something wrong in the first place. Also, even though the idea didn't carry through in the future of the campaign, the God switch in the player's brain is just no way. That should never fly in any campaign under any circumstances unless the player is explicitly okay with it. Definitely not something you could spring on them unexpectedly. Good thing this player got out of this game. So I've been reading some of these horror stories for long enough to want to give one of my own, albeit the lightest one I could remember. Cue mandatory heads up about English being my second language, etc. The cast is simple. Myself, the DM, who we will call DM, Wizard, Druid, and Rogue. Not sure if he was really a that guy persona. Let me know if he qualifies, please. It is summer of 22. I am in a summer school in my university where I teach a class on a STEM subject for a day. The job pays me peanuts but comes with the perk of having access to the food and some drinks for the week and allows me to teach one of my favorite subjects, so I'm happy. Every day that week, I join the lunch and activities meant for the students and blend in enough to start some chats with the younglings. One day, I find out that one of the staff members is running a D&D session for the students that evening. The game is short, but I'm a forever GM for Vampire the Masquerade after my previous D&D game ended, and I haven't been able to participate in another campaign due to time constraints. So, since one of my other colleagues, also a master student we will call Wizard, is interested, I decide to join in, and soon after dinner is done, we take our seats at the table. Now this, as I found out later, is a short campaign comprised of a few riddles and maybe a fight. The dude who runs the game is the chillest man I have ever met, and he has even provided simple pre-made characters in small pieces of paper since it is meant for first-time players. Neat. I pick up a vain halfling bard and start helping my friend to understand her wizard spells. It's nothing complicated, so I take over helping another girl who struggled a bit with her druid. And then he comes, the rogue, a nerdy STEM student stereotype and one of my students. I had a nice discussion with him after my class ended that day, and admittedly, he had some quite nice points. The problem was that this guy did not know where, nor how, to stop. Stop what? What can he stop? I'm just terrified. Anyway, he is super interested and declares, a bit too passionately for my taste, that he will choose the rogue. With everyone in position, the story begins. We all wake up in a stone room. The window of the room is not barred, but it leads to an endless void. We stumble on our feet and chat with each other a bit to allow people to describe their characters and throw a couple of awkward jokes. Everyone, that is, except the rogue, who decides to be dark and distant. The game is just 1 hour. We have no time for this, but you do you, I guess. We check the door and find out that it leads to a round room with 6 doors and a central platform separated from the doors by an endless pit. The doors, including ours, are connected to the platform via planks of wood. We also hear from the maddened wizard who has locked us up, you know, in this castle for his own amusement. Turns out the platform is a teleportation thingy that we can activate if we retrieve 3 of the 5 keys that are positioned in each of the rooms. A concept that makes us collaborate without the need of intrinsic motivations and no space for people to protest. Neat. We start exploring. First room is an office of a dwarf. The rogue goes in and tries to get into some sort of fight with the bored-looking accountant. The dwarf readies a mace, but after we stop the rogue and politely start a discussion, he complains about his boss, gives us our first key, and asks us to come back for tea if we fail to retrieve the other 2. How nice of him. We go to the next room, fight one thing or another, and get the key. Success! Everyone is having a great time, and we don't even mind reminding the rogue that he is a thief, not a maniac. Now let me tell you that this has taken us 45 minutes, which is not terrible. We can get the 3rd key, finish the quest, and free the DM to go and run his game again for the next group. And we, the players, we know that. So we do some recon on the other doors to see which one we want to check. My character opens a mirrored room and stays there looking at his own beauty since I got my moment to shine during the discussion with the accountant. Druid checks a door and hears a beast sleeping. She wants to speak with it using Speak with Animals. However, we convince her that it might not be a great idea since big scary beast is better asleep than awake, so she doesn't do that. Rogue, followed by Wizard, go into another room where he finds 3 shiny crystals. Since there is no fight going on, there we follow. Rogue wants to take the crystals. Wizard takes one before he could do anything, and after quite a few minutes of negotiation, he finally just agrees and gives the 3rd crystal to our last player, a fighter dwarf. Me and Druid do not pick one of these crystals up. Oh no! The crystals are cursed. The players cannot leave the room until we solve the curses, which are solvable by guessing what the curse is. Well, the curses were rather simple. You feel pain when someone says words starting with S, stuff like that. The players are encouraged to roleplay the curses and have a blast shouting out of their lungs. Everyone is having a lot of fun while I am stunned and cannot think with 3 people shouting at me. Druid comes to the rescue and solves the riddle. I will thank her to the end of my days for that. Now, we are already almost over time, but no problem. We can just put the crystals back on their tray and get the key. Fighter and Wizard put their crystals back, but Rogue refuses because shiny. He actually went on and took all 3 of the crystals, if I remember correctly. Cue 5 minutes of in-game and out-of-game explanation from the party and the DM that Rogue does not equal Gollum from Lord of the Rings. No luck. Cue the DM letting him know that the crystals are actually worthless. No, shiny is shiny. Okay, now I get pissed. I look at the wizard, and she is also not too happy with the situation. Druid, who was super shy from the beginning, looks stressed, and the DM looks like he's about to lift the no PvP rule really soon. So I invite everyone to the platform. Everyone follows except for Rogue, me. I take off the plant that connects this room to where the Rogue is. DM responds, oh, okay, you're gonna need to roll for strength. Oh, I'll help too. Oh, me too, said the dwarf and the wizard. Alright, I guess you guys just removed the plank. No strength check since there were 3 of us, and one of them was the strongest of the group. We give Rogue an ultimatum. Give us the key we need and come to the platform, or you could stay there. He stays because shiny. Druid gets to the room with the beast, which is obviously intended for stealth. She wakes up the beast and suggests that if it gives us the key, we will free it and take it with us. She rolls well. Dwarf breaks the beast's chains, and now we have a pet. Okay, now we go back to the platform and restate our ultimatum. Leave the crystals behind and join us, or stay there and die. He stays because my character is a rogue and he wants the shiny. So we use the portal and leave with the beast. We end the mission half an hour late, but with a couple of players who want to play again, so I guess not all is lost. It is not as bad as most of the stories here, and I don't keep any hard feelings towards the rogue either. I just hope he gets over the rogues equals golem thing, but damn, is it the fastest I have ever seen a party turn against a player. Honestly, this has all the perfect hallmarks of a situation where the party would turn against the player. I often advise that out-of-game problems need to be solved with out-of-game solutions, but when you're playing a one-shot or a mini-campaign, the incentive there is much lessened. If it's a one-off, people are not going to care as much about screwing around with you because they're probably not going to play with you again. Rogue was acting annoying in the worst way possible, being stubborn and rude to other players when they're trying to play the game, and on top of that, holding up the game from ending. No one likes the guy who keeps everyone over time, especially in a game where you're supposed to be having fun, with the same guy ruining the whole experience for you. If you want to play with a group, you need to prove that you're worth playing with in some way, shape, or form. Being dismissive, being rude, keeping people over time, and most importantly in this story, being selfish and greedy is not going to make people want to play with you. And when they don't want to play with you, and maybe even screw around with your character, depending on the circumstance, you shouldn't be too surprised. DM here. I run for my friend and his family. They're all new to D&D, and one player in particular seems to already be heading down the dark path. We'll call this young player Joe. I created a DMPC, life cleric, no godlike powers, not decked out in magic items, just a single healer, so that I can assist them in battle when they are learning, and to sprinkle in some lore for the players if they're interested. I'll answer some questions the players might have through this cleric, and he's always cheerful and more than happy to answer. I am a firm believer that DMPCs should be less powerful than the PCs, both because it's their game, and I want them to feel like they are special in this world. That's why I gave my cleric very little offensive capabilities, and built him as pure support. Since the cleric's introduction, he's been nothing but friendly and supportive towards the other player characters, and will always turn down his share of quest rewards or magic items so the players can come out with more stuff. Here's where Joe comes in. The very first battle the cleric assisted in, Joe would mention how he hoped he would die so that he could get the cleric's armor. I mentioned that the dwarven cleric's armor looked old and rusty. It wouldn't fit on a dragonborn, and it would be detrimental to the dragonborn's rage anyway. And also, it wouldn't sell for more than a few gold due to its condition. Joe was adamant that he wanted it anyway. The cleric heals Joe while he takes a beating through levels 1 and 2, and when he's not healing, he's doing his best to damage enemies. Though due to some pretty bad dice rolls when he's attacking, the cleric needs to be martially inept. Joe, out of character, states loudly in annoyance that the cleric is useless because he does very little damage, and Joe ignores that he is being blessed and healed through the battles. Joe then challenges the cleric to a duel. I state in character that as a life cleric, I take great pride in assisting these heroes with their noble quests in a supportive role, and I'm ill-suited to be in direct combat with such an intimidating barbarian as yourself. Basically stroking his ego and trying to avoid PvP, though I think it might have been a good chance with clever use of Inflict Wounds, followed by Sanctuary, waiting for Rage to drop, and then using Inflict Wounds if necessary again. But anyway, he also loves to compare his damage to everyone else in the party, and seems to have some kind of ranking system on who is valuable or useless. There was a battle where he was taking some heavy damage due to wanting to save his rage, just in case, and when he was down to 1 hit point, instead of attacking the wounded kobold in front of him that was his only immediate threat, and would die if Joe succeeded any attack roll, he says he turns around and walks away, moving a leisurely 10 feet. I tell him he could probably kill the kobold, or at least try to dash to get out of range, but he thinks his character is too cool to run away, but was also worried that he might miss the kobold too. Therefore, he just exposes his back to the enemy and barely moves. Then he gets pissed that the kobold would have the audacity to attack him and bring him down to 0 hit points. The cleric healed him back to his feet, but he was still butthurt for something that was nobody's fault, but his own. Other times, he'd brazenly go against whatever the party is doing in classic edgelord form. Example, the mayor of the town invites you into his house to discuss the dire situation the town is in, to which the player characters all follow, except him, who turns around and walks away. I actually countered this once by saying, okay, your character continues on his own adventure. Please re-roll a character that would be inclined to participate in a party. His response was, I roll a god. So I respond, congrats, you won D&D. Please roll another character that wishes to join the party. He didn't re-roll anything and begrudgingly just followed the party. I'm trying my best to ignore out-of-character comments and roleplay the most friendly and supportive DMPC I can, but I can see Joe going murder hobo and power gamery in the future due to his attitude towards the DMPC, towards his fellow player characters, and NPCs that the party encounters. Every one of the other players is getting along and having a great time. It's just Joe who I can see becoming an issue in the future. So, any advice on how I can steer this young lad down the right path? I'd like to nip in the bud before he does anything drastic to harm the experience of the other players. I actually totally get where this guy is coming from with the NPC ally that he has joining the party. My actual play podcast and campaign, Shadow over Carconos, relies on the party caring about Kalia Sulfero. She was central to the story's progression, and I really needed the party to care about her for the plot to work. And that's why, before the campaign even started, I told them, hey look, there's an NPC that's really important here. If you have any problems with how she's played, please tell me first so we can try to figure it out of game to make the characters meld better. She's supposed to be an ally. Luckily, I nailed it on my first try, not to brag or anything. And Kalia Sulfero ended up being a welcome part of both the party and the campaign. You can see a similar principle in Curse of Strahd with Ileana or Matt Mercer's Call of the Netherdeep with the NPC rivals. These are central characters to the campaign, central NPC characters that are important for the party and the plot. Though remember, these are still NPCs. The player characters are always the main characters. I think our edgelord NPC, though, his problem isn't exclusive to the DMPC. I think he's got a case of main character syndrome, showcased by a hostile demeanor and a flagrant disregard for what everyone else is doing. Out of character talk is the best way to solve this. Go up to the problem player and tell them, hey look, I feel like there's a little bit of hostility and bitterness at the table. And, unfortunately, if we don't curtail this problem, I don't think you're going to be able to continue in this game. However, if he responds with hostility to your offer of peace, then that is what I call an immediate kick. Long-time reader, first-time poster. This story happened around 18 years ago, so the details are fuzzy. But the situation was crazy enough to stick in my mind to this day. From start to finish, our campaign was about 90 minutes long, total. This includes character creation, and it is the fastest I have ever seen a game crash and burn. The GM is the main culprit here. But none of us players tried to stop this train wreck from happening until it was far too late. Fair warning, it involves... Great. The system was supposedly the nominee, which we were told was a setting where heaven, hell, and all the other pantheons team up to fight the Cthulhu mythos. I say supposedly because looking at the description of the system today, it doesn't read like what we played at all. None of us knew the system, so we just went along with whatever the one guy who had played before had said. Regardless, this led to us making the following cast of characters. We have the GM, Valkyrie, aka me, Fenrir, a succubus, and a cheerleader with a chainsaw. The game opens with a GM describing us all riding on a Greyhound bus to Nashville, Tennessee. Why we are going to Nashville was never explained. I think the GM expected us to start talking to each other because nothing happened on the bus for about 10 minutes. Valkyrie tries to talk to Fenrir because same pantheon, but that goes nowhere. Cheerleader just sits there not saying anything, getting bored. Succubus says she's trying to seduce someone for a quickie in the bathroom. GM has her roll and she rolls decently. So the GM says she finds a middle-aged man and takes him to the bathroom with her. She does so. At this point, the GM decides there's a group of nuns on this bus and they don't take kindly to all this sinful fornication, so one of them heads to the bathroom and starts pounding on the door. The succubus opens it and gets an earful about how she's a sinner, etc., etc. Succubus declares she's going to seduce the nun too. Now, I've known Succubus's player for a while. She has some amazing dice-like at times. This was one of those times. She managed to roll the equivalent of a near impossible success on her seduction, and this is where the game officially derails. The GM declares that Succubus's seductive aura was so powerful that the nun rips off her clothes and everyone on the bus is consumed by... Like, honestly, I'm speechless. Like, how even... Valkyrie asks if we can resist this, for which the GM allows a contested roll. Cheerleader and Valkyrie both roll, but can't come close to beating Succubus, which means they too have this urge now. Fenrir activates some power that makes him immune to emotions or something, so he's the only one not affected as the bus erupts into a giant... I'm sorry. Even the driver is affected. The only reason the bus doesn't crash is that Fenrir takes the wheel and keeps the bus on the road. The GM goes into a couple brief descriptions of the axe, while the rest of the players are awkwardly chuckling at how absurd this has become. Finally, the party dies down, and Fenrir pulls the bus off the road. Valkyrie goes and sits on the side of the road, while Fenrir catches a rabbit and eats it. Cheerleader was still on the bus, doing nothing. Meanwhile, Succubus declares that since everyone on the bus committed the sin of lust, she's going to drag their souls to hell now. This triggers a 50-minute argument between her and the GM about the nature of sin and redemption and whether one, hanky-panky party is enough to go to hell, while the rest of us sit there uncomfortably. Finally, someone, may have been me, I don't remember, says they're done with this game and they're going home. Everyone else decides, this is a great idea, and we all pack up and go our separate ways. We still meet up next week to play, but it was a different campaign. We all just kind of agreed to not discuss what happened last time. While GM was still there, for a few more sessions at least, we didn't let him run anything else. In fact, we never played In Nomine again. And for that, I honestly cannot blame the group. Oh my god. Now, I will be fair. This is not the fault of the system. I am not familiar with the system, and I assume that the system does not encourage this sort of behavior. Though, of course, if this is the kind of thing you want, then I hope that you find a group that wants it as well. However, clearly, this wasn't that group. I honestly just think the first 10 minutes were so unbelievably boring that Succubus just said, screw it, I guess I'm going to do my thing with some dude, and the GM just decided to take that and roll with it way beyond the scope of what anyone could have foreseen. It is good to see that no extreme fallout happened from this situation, and it seemed like the group just disseminated on average terms. However, I will say that if somebody physically stood up at my game table, yeah, I'm doing something wrong. And for the GM here, there's definitely something wrong. Like I said earlier, if you want this kind of game, you need to clarify. You need to tell people what sort of content is going to be contained in your campaign, because you can end up with situations like this if you don't follow that very basic guideline. Okay, and that's it for today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. If you guys enjoyed it, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out Shadow over Kerkonos, my actual play D&D podcast. The finale is upon us. Part 2 will be out next week. And while you're there in the card, subscribe Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment bonk to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell.